Hello and welcome to the second module on research methodology, which is on logic, reasoning, and science in the research. The aim of every enterprise of knowledge production is human progress. What is knowledge? Knowledge is a system of beliefs. Beliefs is foundational to any understanding. But not all beliefs are true. Only true beliefs constitute knowledge. Now, what makes a belief true? When a belief is justified, it is considered to be true. How do we justify a belief? It is the epistemology, which is a theory of knowledge that studies the nature of knowledge, rationality of the belief, and the justification. It provides the methodology of asserting the truth of ideas or beliefs. Truth assertion involves logic and inference and validation. A researcher should understand the process of logical reasoning, which involves making propositions, testing them, identifying arguments, negotiating intellectual disputes, not committing logical fallacies in arguments, and apply different types of reasoning. What is logic? Logic is a study of methods and principles that distinguish correct reasoning from incorrect reasoning. We reason about any matter by producing arguments to support our conclusions. Our argument includes reasons that justify our beliefs. Reasons could be good or bad. For example, a good argument needs its premises to be true and requires its conclusions to be drawn from those premises. Argument leads to assertion. Assertion in general is accepted for a variety of reasons like authority, emotion, and logic. For example, children are taught to obey parents, teachers, and state. But a good argument needs to be based on logic. Logic helps us to assess the quality of the argument. Assertion needs to be true. But how to ascertain the truth content of an assertion? To ascertain the truth content of an assertion, one has to make a proposition. What is a proposition? A proposition is a sentence which is either true or false. Not all sentences can be propositions. For example, commands or exclamations or declarations. For example, come here at once. Oh my God. Are you mad? These are exclamations or commands. Delhi is the capital city of India, which is true by definition. So it is not a proposition. So a proposition asserts something that we may affirm or deny. There are several types of propositions. There are varieties of propositions. For example, there are simple propositions. Take example, economic agents are rational agents, which can be true, which can be false, which can be tested, which needs to be tested. Similarly, you have compound propositions. Example, only a democratic nation with a constitution can ensure the rights of its citizens. is an example for a compound proposition. It has got three propositions. Only a democratic nation. First of all, a country has to be a democratic nation. Second, with a constitution, that country has to have a constitution. It's a second proposition. Can ensure the rights of its citizens is a third proposition. So when you have such a compound sentence like that, which has got three propositions, we call it a compound proposition. Sometimes you can have disjunctive propositions. For example, a great nation cannot afford to waste the food. A great nation is a one proposition, and it cannot afford to waste its food is a other, which is not necessarily connected. These are called disjunctive propositions. Finally, we have hypothetical propositions. For example, if excess money supply exists in the economy, it produces inflation. So, the second proposition depends on the conditionality of the first, that if money supply exists. So, such a proposition called hypothetical proposition. We construct arguments using propositions. We affirm propositions by drawing inferences. Argument in logic is a reasoning process that involves a group of propositions which follow one from another, which are regarded as providing support for the truth of that one. Every inference has a corresponding argument. Argument has to have a structure. Let's say normally it has the following structure. It has two parts. One is called premises, which constitutes propositions providing reasons for the conclusions. And normally they begin with these kind of words like since, because, for, as, follows from, as shown, may be derived, etc. The second part of the argument is the conclusions. It's an affirmations which are based on the premises. And normally conclusions will have words like because, in accordance with, consequently, therefore, proves that, as a result, follows that, I conclude, it implies, it means, and so on. Then an argument has to have a logic. There are two kinds of arguments following two types of logical reasonings called deductive arguments and inductive arguments. Deductive argument makes a claim that its conclusion is supported by its premise conclusively. For example, let's make an assertion that all men are mortal. And then we make a second statement, Socrates is a man. Hence, Socrates is mortal. The third proposition is derived from the first two. This is purely based on the logical reasoning of the two first premises statements, that all men are mortal and Socrates is a man. The third one can simply logically be derived. Such an argument is called a deductive argument. In contrast, there is other type of argument which is called inductive argument, which makes no such claim but draws a probabilistic conclusion from its premise. For example, smoking has a probability of increasing heart stroke by 30%. So one has studied, let's say 100 cases and found out that 30% of the smoke, of those who smoke, they got cancer. And therefore, draw a conclusion that smoking has a probability of 30% getting cancer. Second example, somebody has examined 100 swans and therefore draw a conclusion that swans are white. So this is an inductive argument. Then validity and truth. Validity and truth of propositions can be complex. There can be valid arguments with true propositions and true conclusions, valid arguments with false propositions and false conclusions, invalid arguments with true propositions and true conclusions, invalid argument with true propositions and false conclusions, invalid argument with false propositions and true conclusions, invalid argument with true propositions with false conclusions, and invalid arguments, false propositions and false conclusions. Yet another important part of arguments is fallacies. An error in reasoning generally is known as a fallacy. One reasons incorrectly when the premises do not support the conclusion. We call argument as fallacious. A fallacy is a type of argument that seems to be correct but contains a mistake in reasoning. In this sense, each fallacy is a type of incorrect argument. An argument that commits some known fallacy is said to be a fallacy, which corresponds to a type of mistake. For example, P is Q. It does not follow that every Q is P. All dogs are mammals, but not every mammal is a dog. Doctors are generally trained well. Hence, every doctor is trained well. Not every doctor is trained well. Such a fallacy is labeled as fallacy of affirming the consequent. Fallacies have a pattern that can easily identifiable. Some usual fallacies are fallacy of non sequitur. When conclusion is not drawn from the premises or the analysis, it is called fallacy of non sequitur. Second one is fallacy of appealing to the populace, or it's called in Latin argumentum and ad populum. Is playing to the gallery, acting on emotions, sentiments. For example, Hitler's emotional appeal to kill the Jews. Fallacy of another type of fallacy is fallacy of appeal to the pity or ad misericordiam. Similarly, fallacy of red herrings, which is a fallacy that uses a distraction. Similarly, fallacy of straw man involves criticizing a distorted or exaggerated, misrepresented version of an argument and claiming to have defeated the original argument. Similarly, fallacy of argumentum ad hominem, indulging in personal attack, or because somebody is so and so, therefore he is talking like that. So instead of talking about the reason, these are some of the fallacies which have to be avoided. In reasoning, as we said, there are two types of reasoning, deductive and inductive reasonings. Science is an influential realm of knowledge that shapes our society. Now, the aim of the science is what? The method of science. In other words, philosophers of science grapple with the question, what is the problem of knowledge, problem of rationality, and reconciliation of these two. So, induction is the reasoning in which premises seek to support strong evidence for the truth of the conclusion. 100 swans observed are white, hence swans are white. On the other hand, deductive reasoning or deductive logic or logical deduction is a process of reasoning from one or more statements to reach a logically certain conclusion. All men are mortal, John is a man, and John is therefore mortal. So, which logic has to be followed, induction or deduction? While these two traditions existed since the time of Aristotle, in the 17th century, these two traditions of reasoning came into confrontation with each other. One school of thought favored induction. For example, Francis Bacon and Locke and David Hume, they have favored induction as the method, as the only valid method. Inductivists who wanted to draw inferences only from the observations and observations alone, they thought that this will ensure certainty and breadth of generalized knowledge. Prestige of this logic has increased when Isaac Newton threw his support behind this method. It is also known as Baconian method, as it was known. It remained influential until David Hume, one of its founders, raised a major problem. He said that the inference is valid only to the extent of the breadth of observations. Beyond that, it is mere faith. So therefore, it is not possible to draw universal knowledge only from inductive reasoning. The other school thought that deduction or the hypothesis making is the only method, only valid method. They are called deductivists or hypothesis. This is advocated by Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz on the continent. They argued that the sound reasoning is the more important than empirical validation. Often facts are chosen in accordance with the reasons. Therefore, reasoning precedes observation. So, therefore, reasoning is much more important than the observation. So, deduction as a method for them provides novelty and depth. Hence, deduction method of reasoning is emphasized as the method of the science. The conflict between these two finally were reconciled by another philosopher called Immanuel Kant in the mid-18th century, who resolved this impasse between these two traditions in his famous work, The Critique of Pure Reason, in which he has argued that there are fundamental problems with both rationalists, or called deductivists, and the empiricists, or the hypothesis dogmas. To deductivists, he told that pure reason is insufficient to validate the truth. It requires an experiential check. To empiricists, he argued that while it is correct that experience is fundamentally necessary for human knowledge, but reasoning is necessary for processing that experience into coherent thought. Thus, Kant argued that induction versus deduction is a false binary. Both are equally needed. And then knowledge production follows these two types of reasoning since then. So, in conclusion, we can say that knowledge production and research is about validation and justification of our ideas and beliefs. We make arguments, propositions, and avoid fallacies in making arguments. We use logical reasoning to distinguish between correct and incorrect arguments. There are two types of reasonings, namely deduction and induction. Though for some time in history, philosophers were divided about which one is more important of validation, logic of validation and justification, it was finally resolved that both are equally important methods of science. Thus, making hypotheses through deduction and validating them through an experiential data or experiment constitutes the basic method of research. Now, today, these two methods dominate and feature all disciplines which they want to call themselves as scientific. You have to make a theory or hypothesis based on a set of premises and drawing a conclusion logically from those premises, which is called a deductive logic. And then you have to subject that conclusion for an empirical testing through an inductive process. And thus, the induction in deduction therefore constitutes the basic methods of reasoning in research. Thank you.